How has China come to dominate the global electric vehicle market, and how are US and EU policymakers responding to protect their domestic manufacturers? Want to untangle the knock-on effect upon transition strategies and find out whether lithium battery-powered vehicles are as green as they seem? Listen on to find out more. Welcome to ESG and the City, your go-to podcast for all things ESG and sustainable finance. We're here to keep you informed and inspired as you navigate the evolving world of ESG and financial services, all in under 10 minutes.
I'm Lauren, and I'm joined by Cameron here today to discuss China's current dominance of the global EV market and how US and EU policymakers are responding, before talking through the resulting knock-on effects upon transition strategies. Cameron, why don't we start by providing listeners with some context?
That sounds like a great idea. So, in terms of sustainability, China remains the country that currently contributes the most to climate change, with a heavy reliance on burning coal to produce electricity and cement, as well as for manufacturing purposes. Whilst China is unlikely to ever overtake the US historic contribution to global warming, it has been the world's biggest emitter of CO2 since 2006. And produced 11 billion tonnes of it in 2023. However, thanks to a number of policies and initiatives, China's emissions are set to peak and begin declining in the near future.
So I think it's fair to say that China's renewables market is booming.
There's no doubt about that. And this is where we encounter the subject of today's episode, electric vehicles. Guided by China's carbon goals, the nation's electric vehicle market experienced explosive growth in 2022. With production reaching 7.058 million vehicles, representing a year-on-year growth rate of 96.9%. By the end of 2023, China accounted for nearly 70% of global EV production, leading to $42 billion worth of Chinese EV exports that same year, and culminating in BYD, a Shenzhen-based company, outselling Tesla for the first time in the final quarter of that year.
There's no doubt that China's EV manufacturing capacity is unparalleled. The country builds and buys more EVs than the rest of the world combined. And, according to the International Energy Agency, in 2023, China used less than 40% of its maximum cell output. Now that statistic is an important one because it provides a real insight into the competitive advantage that Chinese companies hold over other EV manufacturers, their battery production and supply chain expertise. Industry leaders believe that BYD's most important cost advantage is actually in its expertise in producing lithium-based batteries, the most single expensive part of an EV. And, according to Bernstein Research, BYD batteries are among the lowest cost in the world, while also boasting close to the highest energy density, resulting in better performance. The truth of this is perhaps best evidenced by the fact that both Tesla and Toyota are customers of BYD's battery division.
And it's not just BYD excelling. In 2022, Chinese producers benefited from EV battery prices of only $130 per kilowatt hour against a global price of $151 per kilowatt hour.
But this rapid growth has attracted significant international concern, with several countries in possession of large auto manufacturing industries accusing China of driving unfair competition through large subsidies. So the question here is, just how much truth is there to this claim?
Well, there's no doubt that the EV and hybrid industries in China have received significant state support in the past, with consulting firm AlixPartners estimating that state subsidies totaled $57 billion between 2016 and 2022. And a World Bank report indicates that in 2022, the auto sector as a whole received loans with interest rates of roughly 2%. Half the weighted average for all commercial and industry loans in the country. However, this support has slowed significantly in recent years, with the central government terminating a generous 11-year subsidy scheme for EV purchases in 2022 and ending a buyer's rebate scheme entirely in 2023.
This reversal of support is probably most starkly shown by the fact that the average support per vehicle fell from $13,860 in 2018 to just under $4,800 in 2023, which is actually less than the $7,500 credit that went to buyers of qualifying vehicles as part of the US's Inflation Reduction Act. Nevertheless, this hasn't stopped a host of countries from imposing tariffs on China's EV exports.
You're definitely right, and I'll rattle off some of the highlights. In 2024, the United States increased tariffs on Chinese-made EVs to 100% and batteries to 25%, citing concerns about unfair trade practices, whilst Canada followed suit with its own 100% import tariff. Meanwhile, in July of 2024, the EU imposed a provisional anti-subsidy tariff of up to 37.6% on EVs imported from China, after an anti-subsidy investigation launched by the European Commission in October 2023, which was done without any petition by domestic EV producers. Despite the US and EU both utilising tariffs, their aims do seem to differ somewhat.
Absolutely. The US actions appear to reflect a rough estimate of how high tariffs would need to be to dissuade Chinese producers from even contemplating exporting their vehicles to the US at all. The EU, conversely, has suggested it is ultimately open to investment by Chinese EV makers and battery producers, perhaps hoping to bring jobs to the EU and put their own automakers on a more level playing field at home. This is particularly true for Germany, whose automotive car industry relies on China for a large proportion of its sales revenue and has long advocated keeping trade doors open.
But in the midst of the uncertain economic headwinds created by protectionist measures, it could ultimately be the globe's net zero ambition which emerges as the biggest loser. States seeking to remove Chinese EVs and batteries from their supply chains will have to consider the knock-on effects upon their own transition strategies, particularly if they do not have alternative production capacity available. The President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, echoed this sentiment when she claimed that EVs are crucial to the EU's environmental objectives.
An endless cycle of World Trade Organization litigation would certainly slow the uptake of EVs around the world, and at a time when road transport accounts for about a fifth of emissions in the EU and US respectively, moving away from internal combustion engines, ICEs, is a crucial part of transition strategies.
Exactly. Strong EV tech-related tariffs from China, the world's third largest lithium producer, will likely raise prices for consumers. The battery of a Tesla Model S requires around 12 kilograms of lithium to produce, and so manufacturers will need to have alternative sources of lithium in place in order to keep prices low.
And affordability is absolutely crucial to the widespread adoption of EVs. In Europe, as a result of the competition from China, Renault announced in July of 2024 that it aimed to slash production costs for its electric models by 40%. In the US, however, President Trump's executive order, Unleashing American Energy, has thrown a spanner in the works of EV adoption, directing federal agencies to pause disbursements of certain funds under the Inflation Reduction Act of 2022 and the Infrastructure and Investment and Jobs Act of 2021.
Yep, Trump's targeting of what he calls the electric vehicle mandate is somewhat ambiguous, with no official mandate to utilize EVs actually existing. But he likely refers to a combination of the $7,500 EV tax credit for consumers, Environmental Protection Agency's emission standards, as well as tax credits that incentivize domestic battery and EV manufacturing. Nevertheless, when the measures that Trump is taking are combined with the use of tariffs to disincentivize Chinese EV imports, the increased adoption of electric vehicles within the US, which saw a 7.3% increase from 2023 to 2024, does seem under threat.
So, we know that tariffs on Chinese exports of EVs and lithium batteries could slow transition plans, but maybe countries could use this risk as an opportunity to reassess their supply chains to maximize sustainability. After all, lithium mining is not without its environmental harms, often being accompanied by soil damage and the contamination of the water supply of local populations. So perhaps the lithium battery supply chain disruption will allow for a pivot towards batteries produced using more abundant and less toxic raw materials.
Absolutely. And this is a point highlighted by Gleb Yushin, a professor at the School of Materials and Engineering at the Georgia Institute of Technology, who argues that without research and development of electrodes based on abundant elements, EV development will stall within a decade.
At the very least, lithium-ion battery recycling practices will need to be optimized to account for the disruption. Dead lithium-ion batteries have recently been responsible for catastrophic fires, breaking out in various recycling plants across the globe. And it's estimated that the US and Canada have incurred $1.2 billion in losses because of lithium-ion battery fires. Without more efficient practices, there will be a hesitancy to invest in the facilities needed to meet rapidly increasing recycling demands.
Whilst there is so much more to discuss, that's unfortunately where we'll have to leave the topic for today. But we want to hear from you, our viewers, so have a think. Do EV trade wars with China risk leaving transition plans by the wayside? Or will they strengthen domestic EV manufacturing and potentially even provide some breathing room to seek further clean tech innovation?
Thanks for listening to ESG in the City. If you found today's episode engaging, be sure to like, share, and hit that subscribe button wherever you get your podcasts. Got questions or suggestions? Connect with us on LinkedIn at Novartis Global or reach out to us at esg@novartis.global. We'd love to hear from you.
Here's Cameron.
And here's Lauren.
Signing off for now.
Sustainably yours, Novartis Global.
This podcast is a 2025 production by Novartis Global, researched and written by Cameron Maguire, presented by Cameron Maguire and Lauren Chin, video and audio production by Thibaut Lacombe.